Good afternoon, Maine. Hopefully, I haven't been live too long um, on that little blip that I had. Um, Thank you all for joining us. This is once again the Muddy Waters podcast, and we are joined today. We have the pleasure of having some technical difficulties. You'll notice I'm in my car because no power in the house, and so we had to make do because I have the opportunity. That only comes up every now and then to have Laurel Libby on. So Representative Laurel Libby, thanks for joining us.
I am delighted to join you today, Chuck. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, always obviously lots going on in the world of Laurel Libby. We were supposed to do this originally last Thursday, but in I guess we'll call it Laurel Libby fashion, that day ended up being the Girls and Women's Sports Day up in Augusta, and we were both up there. I actually had the opportunity for the first time in my life to give actual in-person testimony for a bill, which was a fun experience.
That was your first time in person giving testimony at the State House.
That's correct. Despite the fact that I do a podcast, I'm actually a relatively shy person. I'm an introvert, not an extrovert, and so it took a lot for me to do that. But no, it's something that we need people to stand up. We're very thankful that this is something that you've been standing up for and keep talking about. But we need people, including men, even if we don't have children yet, to stand up and protect our young girls.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you were able to make it that day. Thank you for speaking up.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it was I overcame the shenanigans of the Democrats where the introducers of the bill did not realize that their time introducing the bill would cut into the time that people could testify in favor in that first segment, because they did this weird thing where 2 hours of in favor, 2 hours opposed, and then they had neither for nor opposed, and then they went back to in favor of. And because of the amount of time that was taken up by the representatives, who I think again didn't realize that they were cutting into the time that other people would be there, a lot of people that were there to testify in favor of the bill had to leave because they have other things that they have to do with their life, and they couldn't dedicate an entire day. Fortunately, I was like, I'm going to stick around, and there were a couple of us that did. But yeah, that was a really interesting experience. And again, like what I hear from people who are in the room is that they didn't realize that was like the Republican representatives who were introducing the bills did not realize that was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there are always new shenanigans, Chuck. I guess that's the lesson from this. And the Democrats can always come up with some excuse to give some Mainers less time to talk, unfortunately.
Yeah, and unless it's the alphabet mafia, they didn't have any of their time cut into. Yeah. So since the last time you've been on, I think we were talking about paid family medical leave. Obviously, your life has been turned upside down by this issue. So, there's so much that goes on with that. Obviously, the first thing is you posted the picture that was from publicly accessible everywhere, all the details in that picture. But you posting it apparently was wrong. Then you get censured. And so just talk about what the experience has been like, what your life has been like, for the past couple of months dealing with this.
It has certainly, you say turn things upside down. That is pretty apt, I would say. It has been a roller coaster at times, and we've had to have some really interesting conversations with our kids that I think I had not ever anticipated having to have. But certainly am so thankful for the support of Mainers and folks from across the country who have heard about this, who are astounded that we're discriminating against Maine women and girls at our state. And I have to say, that's been the overwhelming feeling, is just feeling really tremendous support from folks in our state, outside of our state, and realizing that we are absolutely not in the minority on this issue. We are very much in the majority. And that has been an interesting realization, because I think that we hear, the noise is so loud on the extreme left as far as some of these woke policies, including biological males and girls sports, that you think that's reality. And the truth of the matter is that it is not. And so that has been, I think, a gradual understanding over the last couple of months to see where Mainers really sit on some of these policies.
Yeah, I think I would say that I was also very surprised. Like, I would say when they came out and they started saying it was an 80-20 issue nationally,
Mm.
and then finding when they were doing the polls here in the state of Maine, where it's like somewhere in the mid.
I think we may have lost Chuck, but I think I know where he was going with that commentary on the polling. So Maine had polling that showed that about 2/3 of Mainers are opposed to biological males participating in girls' sports. And if you look a little bit deeper, though, at that polling, where it says, 63 to 67% of Mainers don't want to see biological males in girls' sports. If you look at the other numbers, there's about 20% of folks who say, yes, biological males should be participating in girls' sports. We absolutely support that. And then there's this middle group that is, about 13 to 17%, 13% or so, that says, gosh, we don't know. We don't really know enough about the issue. We are undecided. And so it's really interesting to see that the polling follows that national trend where 80% of folks or so are in this either don't support biological males in girls' sports or aren't quite sure where they fall. And only 20%, which follows the national polling, are utterly convinced that biological males should be dominating in girls' sports. I'm not sure. We may have lost Chuck for good, but I'm just going to keep on chatting with you guys about the issue and on other ongoing issues until I get a message from Chuck one way or another. So if you have been following this issue and you've been following what went on last week there were the public hearings that Chuck and I were talking about related to legislation that would say once and for all whether biological males are allowed to participate in girls' sports or not. So, of course, at the crux of this issue is wording in the Maine Human Rights Act that says that that we have to consider gender identity when considering these policies. And that's where Maine Principals Association has come down and said, we are following the law. The law says that we have to allow someone's gender identity to dictate which team they are allowed to participate on. And so some of the legislation that we had public hearings for last week with the Judiciary Committee were to address that question and to address whether the words gender identity should be in the Maine Human Rights Act or not, or if they should be considered for sports or not, sports and spaces. The other legislation is specifically regarding biological males in girls' sports. And that legislation, there were a number of bills. The primary bill was a bill submitted by Representative Liz Caruso that would say, no, biological males are not allowed to participate in girls' sports and not allowed to be in those intimate spaces like bathrooms and locker rooms. And so those bills had the public hearing on Thursday that Chuck was at the State House testifying for the first time and that I was at as well. And I think the Judiciary Committee had not anticipated how many folks would want to testify on those bills because there were only a few hours allotted. And yet the public hearing went from mid-morning or so until about 10 o'clock at night, just on the first set of bills. And so it was great to see folks like Chuck there able to make their voices heard on the issue. We also heard from a number of young female athletes who have had to participate against biological males in the past, and they spoke to how unfair it is and how it impacts them personally. And I think that's been a piece that's really been missing as we hear from folks like Governor Mills, who have essentially ignored the fact that these young women are being discriminated against and tried to tuck that to the side. We've just been continuing the conversation, Chuck, about biological males and girls' sports and the public hearing that happened last Thursday. I think he's still joining us back at another spot with some Wi-Fi. But that was really inspiring to see that there's been, one young woman, Cassidy Carlisle, who's been speaking up for a couple months now. And she was joined at the public hearing by 3 of her teammates who spoke up, some of them for the first time, spoke up on this issue and talked to how this has personally impacted them. And I think, I would love to think that the Judiciary Committee is going to hear their words and respond accordingly, but that is yet to be determined. All right, let's see if we've got anything from Chuck. All right, what else is going on in that realm? Well, there's also the lawsuit that I have pending before the Supreme Court. But another issue that has come up in Maine, if we want to switch gears and talk about that, is voter ID. Voter ID is overwhelmingly popular with Maine folks. Polling demonstrates that across party lines, people support voter ID. Maine is one of only a handful of states that don't require voter ID at the polls. And if you've been following along, you may know that there's a citizens initiative, Voter ID for Me. You can learn more at voteridforme.com, that collected signatures. We had almost 800 volunteers help collect signatures and get that on the ballot. 171,000 plus Maine citizens signed. Those signatures were turned into the Secretary of State, and it will be on the ballot in November. The Secretary of State recently published the question that will be on the ballot. And in response to this question and how the Secretary of State worded it, hey, Chuck, you're back. Maybe. We were just talking about voter ID.
I'm back.
All right. We discussed biological males and girls sports. We talked about the public hearings and the young women who turned out in support of the legislation. We talked about the variety of bills that we had for public hearing last Thursday. And we just moved on to talk about voter ID, but I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for soldiering on in my absence. What a day for technology. My phone decided that it wanted to overheat while I was in mid sentence, so that was like I didn't know that was happening, but yeah, yeah. So again, I think you've talked about a lot of the kind of big things that are going on in our world. And as much as possible, have you already got into, or can you talk as kind of as much as you can about your process at the court system for trying to be able to restore? Because I think one of the biggest things about this is not only have your voting rights been taken away, but essentially that's disenfranchised the voters of your entire district. And so you're fighting it, and now you're at the Supreme Court, and yeah, just have you already got into that, or?
We haven't. I was waiting for you to come back to dive on into that, but I'm happy to outline where we're at the moment. Awesome. So long story short, when I made my post, I think most people are probably aware that a week later I was censured by the Democrat majority, and I have since, for the last 2+ months, not been allowed to speak on the floor, or most importantly, to vote on behalf of my constituents. So yes, I have 9,000 constituents in my district that are disenfranchised, that are unable to have their voices heard in the State House. And so we filed suit, of course, in federal district court. And at this point, that case has moved up to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. We're scheduled to have oral arguments on June 5th. But in the meantime, our emergency application to get my vote back, to be able to vote on behalf of my constituents while the case plays out, is now before the Supreme Court. So that was filed a little over a week ago. And then last week, Maine's Attorney General responded and, of course, said, let's continue to disenfranchise House District 90. That's warranted, in his opinion. And so we've responded, and now it's in the court's hands. And so there's a number of ways that it could play out. We're optimistic and hopeful that they will decide to take up the case and take a vote on it, on whether I should have my vote back and be able to vote on behalf of District 90. And then that would be that I would be able to vote while the rest of the case plays out. So the case is not over when the Supreme Court rules, but that would be a great indicator of their opinion for sure.
Okay, so that would mean that there are basically two things before the Supreme Court. One is the case in general, and then the other is to temporarily, until it's decided, give you back, the right of your voters more than of yourself to actually represent your voters in Augusta.
Yeah, so the piece that's before the Supreme Court is simply my ability to vote while the case moves forward. The case itself regarding voice and vote is going to be heard before the First Circuit Court of Appeals on June 5th. And so that case moves forward in the First Circuit Court of Appeals. The piece that's with the Supreme Court is the question of whether my vote should be counted while the case plays out.
Okay, that's helpful, because I was under the impression that the whole case was before the Supreme Court and that the First Circuit Court of Appeals had rejected you. So they just rejected the emergency kind of let me get my vote back piece.
Exactly. Just the emergency piece. And so the full case itself is still before the First Circuit Court of Appeals, and that has yet to play out. So we have two pieces pending. One we're hoping to hear from the Supreme Court this week. The other is the beginning of June. We'll move forward.
Wow. Just did you expect at the beginning of this year that you were going to be going and dealing with all these court cases, the Supreme Court, First Circuit Court of Appeals? Is that normal in the day in the life of a state representative?
It is absolutely not normal, and it has been a huge learning curve. But I'm thankful for sure that this has brought to light, I think a very full way what's going on in Maine. The agenda to silence Maine women and girls and the active discrimination that's going on against them, and that hopefully at the end of the day we'll have resolution somehow, even if it's in 2026 by electing a different majority than the one that is currently ruling so tyrannically in Augusta.
Yeah. And so let's play out, let's say the First Circuit Court of Appeals declines you. Maybe it even goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And let's say in a crazy, I think, dystopian world, you get declined. Are you going to apologize so you can get your voting rights back?
I think I've been pretty clear on my willingness to apologize. I certainly feel the weight of not being able to fully represent my constituents and not being able to vote and speak on their behalf. And so, there's a lot that's going to happen between now and any final resolution of this case. So I don't think I can really give hypotheticals, but I will say that I certainly will work to do everything in my power to restore their right to representation, and ensure that we don't go backwards as far as encouraging Maine women and girls to speak up for themselves and speak up against the discrimination that's going on in our state.
Well, obviously a lot of this came about as a result of the president. It's funny, the focus on his executive orders, which are kind of involved in the process, obviously, but there's also the reality of Title IX, which is has nothing. Actually, the changes in Title IX going back to the 2020 revisions actually has nothing to do with Trump's executive orders, although he has said you need to comply, which is actually his job as executive branch, right? But with him becoming president and standing the way that he has, I think it's emboldened a lot of people. And I think you're standing up and you're posting that has emboldened a lot of people. And, what's interesting, what I keep hearing from the other side is it's well, there's two transgender athletes winning medals. They don't say that. They usually say competing, but I mean, winning medals, taking trophies away from girls. In the state. Is it really that big of an issue? Is sometimes what is said, but what's being missed at that is that this is not about just the two, the trophies being taken away. It's about an entire group of people, women, natural women, real women, being silenced because they're afraid. And that's one of the things that's been great after you spoke up and a number of other people started speaking up. that some of our young girls, that's what really impresses me when I was in Augusta, like how many of these young women they're nervous. They're not like excited to go and stand before this tribunal of people who can't do math. But they're doing it, and I was really appreciative of seeing, and it's interesting because there's this debate, and I'll give you an opportunity to respond to all this too, but there's this like conversation that I keep hearing, and I don't disagree with it, but the conversation is that we need men and adults, like we need adults to stand up for these girls. And what's interesting is nobody cares what the adults have to say, but people are listening more than they are to the adults anyway, to these young girls, because you can't deny their experience. Whereas, me anyway, so I think it's really interesting, but we do need more people speaking up. And I think one of the things, and I think you would agree with this, but you can, again, I'll let you speak to it. But when I was there, it was like, how many people were there for the opposition versus how many people were there to speak on behalf of common sense and reality, and why you think that might be the case.
Yeah.
But there's a lot.
There's a lot there. So I'm going to address kind of the shortest answer first, and that is, why weren't more people there speaking up on behalf of these bills and speaking on behalf of common sense? I think that was your last question. I think the Democrats have demonstrated over the last 6 years, with a Democrat majority and Governor Mills in the Blaine House, that they have no interest in listening to Maine people whatsoever. They will hear your testimony and then they'll do whatever the heck they want. And I think Maine people are tired of that, and they know that that's what's going on. And so they're exhausted. They know they're not being listened to. They know that the will of the people is not being done. And so why show up? And that's valid. I understand that perspective. And certainly it's, well, we'll stop there. It's valid. I also think it is incredibly important to speak up on behalf of the right thing and justice, regardless of whether we prevail or not. And so I see both sides, and I'd love to see people filling the State House and speaking on their own behalf, speaking on behalf of those who can't, every day of the week. But I understand why they're not. And at the same time, I was absolutely so excited to see so many young people, so many young ladies at the State House. And I thought they did speak incredibly beautifully to the experience that they have been going through. And certainly I've now learned that two is not the limiting number. But at the same time, I think we need both, all of the above, to speak up, because we do need these young women to speak up and tell their experience. But why would they, if they don't see the example of their seniors speaking up on their behalf as well? Why would they go out on a limb if they know that there is no one out on that limb with them? And so I think we have to have both. We have to have adults willing to speak up on their behalf. We have, a coach in Southern Maine who has really faced a lot of backlash, Alan Cornwall, for speaking up, and he has not backed down. And I really appreciate that. He sees what is going on, and he's spoken up on behalf of Maine's young women. And we need more of that, because we shouldn't be asking these girls to do something that we are not willing to do. So all of the above should speak up. Chuck.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartly agree. And I think when I think about the girls that are speaking up, they're not being, it's not like, I feel like this probably happens on the right and the left, but I feel like more so on the left, where the parents like push the kid to speak, right? That's not what we're seeing here, but we are seeing parents that are supporting girls who want to speak out, right? And without that, these girls would not be speaking out, right? And I think there are too many people in our culture here in the state of Maine who are ignorant of the reality that we know now, right? That this is a 65% of the state of Maine, is on our page, and that's according to polls. It's probably, like if people really thought this through and really understood all the consequences of what was going on, I still think it's even an 80-20 issue here in the state of Maine. And so the people are behind us, but people are still, they live in fear. It's like, you look at what the revolutions that have happened in other countries, like you hear about the Bolshevik Revolution, and it was a small minority that took power. And I think that they did it through this same type of thing that, like the kind of this other community, the LGBTQ, the alphabet mafia, this stuff that's going on is it's actually a small group of people that believe in this, but they make everyone afraid of them. You will lose your job. You will be called a bigot. And I called that out when I was speaking, because I was like, this is why I'm here. Like, I don't have kids, but I'm here because there are dads or moms and dads that are unwilling to show up because they're afraid of losing their jobs. And they're afraid of being called a bigot. That's absolutely ridiculous that we live in a society where people can't speak up for fear of losing their job. But it also is a reality that we need people to, like, be afraid. This is something, I'm sorry, this is worth considering losing your job over, right? Like, this is you're going to let girls be in these uncomfortable situations because you might lose a job with a company that doesn't care about you anyway, in a reality that we live in a society where there are plenty of jobs available for the most part. Like, maybe you've got this really great job and whatnot, but a lot of places are hiring. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of opportunity, and we have a lot of conservatives here who will hire people. And so I think we need more people to be willing to speak up and endure that risk, because it's worth it. Saving and protecting our girls, is that not worth it? That's the question, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, when it comes to our kids, where do you even draw the line, right? Standing up for your kids and their future in our state. And so, you know, when folks bring up it's only 2, what's the big deal? What's the acceptable number of young ladies that should be pushed aside? Is it 2? Is it 10? Is it, like, where does that line get drawn? And I would say at 1 young woman being discriminated against and pushed aside is 1 too many.
Yeah, and this is such a common sense thing. It's so hard. Like, I'm tired of talking about it because it's such an obvious thing. And like I made the comment in my I don't think they liked me when I was presenting my little thing, especially how I ended it. I couldn't help myself. It was polite, but also, like, irritating to them. But this is common sense. And I kept saying that. I was like, this is common sense. This is simple math. This is not calculus, right? And I ended, and this is what I feel like I saw Representative Coon's face twitch a little bit. But I said 2 + 2 = 4, and that was my final statement. And because it is simple. Like, they can't 1984 us and convince us that 2 + 2 = 5, but that's what they're trying to do with so many people. And it just isn't. It's obvious. We all know it. We need to acknowledge it out loud and be willing to speak up. But yeah, so I know we've got only a little bit more time left, so we've got to get into speculation now, because that's what everybody wants to know. Everybody wants to know, what is Laurel running for? That's the question. What are you doing next? Because everybody thinks that there's I think a lot of people think that you're going to run for governor. There are some people who I know that there was a lot of chatter back when you were on back in January about getting you to kind of run against Susan Collins and try to get her out, because a lot of people believe she's a rhino. And then there's also, other offices, and just wondered if you had anything to share on, what's happening with the future of Laurel Libby in Maine politics.
Well, I can tell you that I don't see political wisdom in attempting to primary out the last sitting Republican senator in New England. And so I could be really clear on that one.
Right, that's great. Yeah, clarity is good.
As far as the future of Laurel Libby, I am registered to run for my seat, and I have been since just after the November election. I registered right after that to run for re-election. And at this point, I'm considering all options because, my primary focus is our state and my kids' future in our state. Just like my husband and I, they've been born and raised here, and I want my kids to stick around and to have an amazing state full of opportunities before them in the future. And so the future is going to be, where I think I can make the most difference to advance liberty in Maine. That will be the determining factor as for the future of Laurel Libby. So thank you for asking. No announcements at this point, but certainly I'm going to be sticking around to fight for the future of Maine.
Well, we appreciate that. Obviously, you're doing a lot to help the people of Maine, and specifically our young girls, and helping give them a voice. I know that you've brought a number of them along with you to DC, which I'm sure was an experience for them. And a lot of people have been commenting as I've been posting their videos of some of their speeches that they're hoping that they're going to become future legislators here in the state. We may have started some political careers at the very least, or I say we, I didn't do much, but everybody else in the process. And so, appreciate you sticking up for our girls. And I'm glad that as that's happened, more and more people are beginning to stand up against the absurdity of the left. And I'm really hopeful for 2026. We've got our work cut out for us. So if you're at home thinking, what can I do? Get involved. In every way possible. Use all your resources at your disposal to try and help the Republicans win a majority in the House, Senate, and whoever the gubernatorial candidate is. We need that seat as well. And so get out, get involved, get educated, and share all that kind of stuff with this podcast. Thank you all for watching. And again, thank you so much, Laurel. Do you have words before we end this interesting podcast where I had to? It's the only time that I've ever been kicked off. This is the second time I've had you on, and it's the second time that I lost connection, and you had to go it alone without me. I don't know what it is about that. So, but anyway,
I don't know. Maybe the third time's the charm. Chuck, to your statement that folks should get involved, I would second that. And I guess what I would say is when I first got involved in Maine politics, I realized, and I've realized since, that our state is where it's at because many of us sat back and didn't get engaged and involved. And so it can be a learning curve, figuring out where and when and how you can plug in. But you don't necessarily have to run for state rep. Maybe you will. But do get involved and help make a difference. Because if we all step up and do our part, then we certainly can win our state back. We only lost it by 60 votes last year, so there's no reason we can't take our state back next year.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to seeing that happening, and one way or another fighting alongside in whatever capacity to put an end to this insanity and save our country, our state from ruin. Because that's, if we don't change something now, that's where we're headed. It's ruin, and we're headed there really fast. It's like we're not only are we on the highway to hell, but we're in the passing lane. As a society, if we don't act now and fix things. So, yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks everybody. We'll see you again. I think Wednesday. All right. See you.